Growing up as the only child of a hardworking single mother instilled certain traits in me from an early age: resilience in the face of adversity, empathy for those struggling, an inherent desire to lift others up rather than push them down. These qualities shaped me profoundly, though I didn't fully appreciate them until much later in my life. My name is Eliza, and I'm a 32-year-old logistics coordinator. My job keeps me on my toes as I oversee intricate product deliveries for the East Coast branches of a renowned bakery franchise. I juggle suppliers, transport companies, warehouse stock, and customer accounts daily to ensure all the baked goods arrive at their intended destinations on schedule. It's chaotic but rewarding. Beyond work, I enjoy spending evenings trying out new restaurants with friends or curled up reading historical fiction novels that sweep me away to far-off places and eras. I had a modest but comfortable life filled with laughter and adventure, at least until I met Daniel Clarkson 2 years ago on a chilly October afternoon. I stopped at a cozy Italian cafe near my office to grab a quick coffee before a crosstown meeting. The aroma of freshly ground espresso filled the air as I browsed the display case piled high with buttery pastries and decadent cakes. My mouth watered just looking at them. Behind me, in line, stood a man in an impeccably tailored navy suit, his short brown hair neatly styled, with the faintest hint of a 5 o'clock shadow across his strong jawline. He was typing busily on his phone but looked up briefly to smile at me after I placed my order. That quick moment was all it took. Our eyes met and I felt a jolt of electricity coursing through me. There was an intriguing depth behind those bright blue eyes of his that instantly drew me in. Little did I know then how dramatically that man, Daniel Clarkson, would impact the trajectory of my life from that unassuming day forward. My perfectly balanced existence was about to be turned completely upside down in ways I couldn't possibly have imagined at the time. Daniel and I began dating shortly after meeting at the cafe. The attraction was instant, beyond just the physical. We connected effortlessly through late-night conversations about our dreams, families, views on life. It felt comfortable. Familiar? Right. Within months, I knew I was falling hard for this charming, quick-witted man. When Daniel proposed on our 1-year anniversary, I joyfully accepted without hesitation. We married in a small, intimate ceremony 6 months later. Our first year together as husband and wife was pure bliss. We took weekends trips to the countryside, hosted dinner parties for friends, attended galas arm in arm dressed to the nines. It was everything I had hoped love could be. Of course, the fairy tale couldn't last indefinitely. The first warning sign appeared when Daniel's father, Mr. Clarkson, suffered a severe stroke, leaving the right side of his body paralyzed. Daniel and I had just returned from our anniversary trip in Italy when we received the difficult news. I'll never forget walking into the sterile, overly bright hospital room and seeing the strong, imposing man I once knew looking so frail in the crisply tucked hospital bed. The stress lines on Mrs. Clarkson's face had deepened overnight, with worry. Daniel stood silently staring out the window, his jaw clenched. In the months that followed, I found myself unexpectedly thrust into the role of Mr. Clarkson's primary caregiver. Daniel and his mother embarked on extended trips to Switzerland and France to consult with neurologists, leaving me behind. Their absences stretched from weeks to months as I took on the full-time care of Daniel's father. My once blissfully balanced life began tipping slowly, then more rapidly, into chaos. I struggled to reconcile my career's demanding pace with the needs of my bedridden father-in-law. The long nights caring for him left me exhausted, straining to keep all the balls in the air. My resilience was being put to the test more intensely than I could have imagined. The demands of balancing my career and caregiving only increased with time. I relocated into the Clarksons' sprawling estate to better attend to Mr. Clarkson's needs. My days became a blur of client conference calls and coordinating major deliveries at work, rushing home to manage his schedule of medications, physical therapy, and other treatments. My saving grace was my longtime friend Sarah, who I first met through work years ago. She was my confidant, a sympathetic ear on late nights when I felt completely drained, questioning if I had taken on too much. "This is not the life you signed up for, Eliza," Sarah reminded me gently over yet another glass of wine. I know, I sighed. When Daniel proposed, fancy estates and waiting on his father hand and foot wasn't part of the picture. But I can't just abandon his dad. Mr. Clarkson has no one else. What about Daniel and his mother, though? Sarah asked. How long have they been gone this time? I averted my eyes, staring into the blood-red depths of my wine glass. 3.5 months, I admitted. Sarah grabbed my hand, waiting until I met her compassionate gaze. You have one of the biggest hearts I know, Eliza, but in taking care of everyone else, don't forget your own limits, and don't feel guilty about having them. If only it were that simple. Mrs. Clarkson's piercing looks when I fumbled a bit, assisting her husband, reinforced that I was an unwelcome interloper in her eyes, someone who swooped in to take advantage of the family's misfortune. Only Mr. Clarkson's initial cold aloofness toward me slowly warmed into appreciation. The more he witnessed my perseverance in caring for him, he became the sole bright spot in it all. I see now why my son fell in love with you, Mr. Clarkson commented one evening as I helped him walk slowly around the manicured gardens. I stumbled slightly in surprise but quickly regained composure. Oh, why do you say that? I asked, touched by the first compliment he had paid me. You have a strength and selflessness beyond your youth. Mr. Clarkson's perspectives continued shifting as I cared for him day in and day out. The man who once brushed off my efforts with cool indifference came to engage more actively in his physical therapy sessions. He asked thoughtful questions about my coordination of expansive delivery routes and supplier negotiations at work, acknowledging my competence. At the office, I faced my own pivotal moment when my supervisor offered me an ambitious promotion to Vice President of Logistics. It would mean more travel, longer hours, and oversight of the entire logistics branch nationwide. I stared numbly at the letter in my hand. 3 months ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity. Now, with Mr. Clarkson, my thoughts swirled that night as I helped him prepare for bed. Seeing my strained expression, he patted my hand gently. Something is clearly bothering you, my dear. Out with it. I sighed. Just weighing a major career decision right now on top of everything else. I gestured around us. Mr. Clarkson studied me for a moment. You know, when my stroke initially paralyzed my painting hand, I thought my career as an artist was over. I believed my usefulness and passion were suddenly lost. I listened intently, uncertain where his story was headed. With your patience and creativity in adapting my therapy, though, I have discovered new techniques. My left hand now has some gift for painting as well, though I never would have known without having been pushed outside my comfort zone. I mulled over his perspective long after leaving his room that night. If Mr. Clarkson could face adversity and still evolve his craft, perhaps I too could navigate complexity and find my way towards purpose and meaning amid the chaos. The next morning, I requested a meeting with my supervisor and hesitantly accepted the promotion offer, hoping I could strike that delicate life balance after all. Accepting the promotion meant extended hours at the office and more frequent work trips. My visits to see Mr. Clarkson grew less frequent by necessity. I still helped manage his caregivers and medical appointments, but relying on others for hands-on care killed me. I wondered if he felt I had abandoned him. It was on one quick lunch trip back home that I overheard a heated conversation between Daniel and his mother. I paused outside the closed study door, eavesdropping despite myself. "We can't keep doing this, Daniel," Mrs. Clarkson said sharply. "These neurology consultations are draining your inheritance money rapidly, and now with your sister Emma needing dental surgery, I have to divert more funds." "We can't just give up on Dad, though," Daniel interrupted angrily. "His progress has stalled. The experts we saw in Geneva said we should—" Mrs. Clarkson cut him off. "Your father made his choice years ago, dedicating himself to art over the family business. We all have to face consequences now because of it. Even your wife has distanced herself from caregiving duties." I bristled, but continued listening silently. Daniel's voice held an unfamiliar bitterness. "Eliza tried understanding Dad's needs when we couldn't, but you drove her away too eventually. You drive everyone away." Doors slammed, floors paced, cubes of ice clinked in glasses as more was said, too muffled behind walls to decipher. I slipped away unseen with a heavy heart and a dawning realization. Daniel and his mother were as broken in their own ways as Mr. Clarkson. Yes, even my darling Daniel, who sweetly brought me hand-picked wildflowers during our courtship, had deeper issues than I grasped. Why else would he leave his wheelchair-bound father for so long? I did not know this man at all. My mind wandered back to our first meeting at that cozy Italian cafe I loved. Perhaps I only saw then what I wanted to see, the charming, put-together businessman, not the real man beneath the tailored suit and disarming smiles. If only I could turn back time and view first encounters through wiser eyes. My questions about Daniel and his family multiplied, though answers remained elusive. Whenever I broached the topic of Mr. Clarkson's care or Daniel's disappearances, deft subject changes ensued. It was Matt Clarkson himself who finally shed light on the situation one Tuesday afternoon. I had slipped home on my lunch break to bring him a new sketch pad. When I entered his room, though, I was stunned to find him standing calmly by the windows, gazing out at the gardens. "Mr. Clarkson," I rushed to his side. "Should you be out of bed unassisted?" He patted my shoulder reassuringly. "Don't fuss yourself. I'm perfectly fine. It was time I confessed the truth." I shook my head in confusion as he guided me gently to sit across from him. "You see, my dear, the severity of my stroke has been embellished, shall we say. Perhaps I relished the doting attention at first, but I cannot in good conscience watch you run yourself ragged trying to care for me, not when there are people who need you far more." I stared at him dumbfounded, struggling to process this revelation. Mr. Clarkson sighed, his eyes downcast. "In my misguided efforts, I fear I've enabled my son's reckless behaviors and estranged you from a marriage that once brought you joy." Hot tears sprang unbidden to my eyes at his words. Before I could respond, though, raised voices echoed from downstairs. Mr. Clarkson and I hurried to investigate the commotion. At the base of the stairs stood a red-faced Daniel shouting at his mother and aunt. "You can't do this! The Backery is my legacy, my birthright." Mr. Clarkson inserted himself firmly between them. "No, Daniel. Your birthright ended when you plundered funds from our accounts. Did you think news wouldn't travel back to me?" He pointed a trembling finger at his ashen son. "You are hereby stripped of all claims and management rights to the family company, effective immediately." I watched numbly as Daniel raged, argued, and ultimately stormed away, vowing revenge. My husband's deception penetrated my core, severing the few fraying threads still tethering my heart to his. I had given everything to support this family. Now, at last, I knew what I must do. My decision to divorce Daniel was not made lightly or impulsively. Consultations with lawyers yielded unexpected revelations about the man I married. Daniel had substantial debts unknown to me, gambling losses, risky business investments gone awry, luxury purchases well beyond even his lavish means. My attorney also uncovered Daniel's previous marriage to a woman named Eliza for 3 brief years before our wedding. It was annulled quickly and quietly, but you have grounds to review assets distribution and alimony claims, my lawyer advised. I rubbed my temples, sighing heavily. This feels so sordid. I just want freedom from this entanglement. And so the legal machinations and negotiations wore on. Daniel predictably contested the divorce terms at every turn. When he declared his intent to sue me for abandoning his bedridden father, I almost laughed at the audacity. Mr. Clarkson handled the matter efficiently, providing signed affidavits on my diligent caretaking. Throughout the arduous proceedings, I found respite in Mr. Clarkson's company. We would reminisce about better times, my whirlwind engagement to Daniel, those first blissful months together. "You brought such lightness and optimism into this house, my dear," Mr. Clarkson mused. "I shall be sorry to lose my live-in confidant when all is settled." I squeezed his wrinkled hand affectionately. "It heartens me you can speak so warmly after everything you've endured, but this isn't goodbye forever. No matter where life takes me next, I hope we stay in touch." He studied me with those penetrating eyes that now held such warmth. Of that I have no doubt. You and I, we wounded healers, must stick together. Coming from a man who valued stoicism and self-reliance, his words touched me profoundly. If we could transform hardship into wisdom, perhaps there was hope. My divorce finalized just shy of our 2-year wedding anniversary. The universe has interesting timing sometimes. I reclaimed my modest downtown apartment, my name, my independence. Hours once consumed caring for others now opened for self-discovery. I traveled to places that long called to me, towering forests out west, the electric chaos of New York, Michelin-starred cuisine in Montreal. I journaled under the stars in Arizona, crying cathartic tears over a failed marriage that wasn't entirely failed since it gave me Mr. Clarkson's friendship. When not unraveling knots from my past, I poured energy into new creative pursuits. I enrolled in Italian cooking classes, my sauce bubbling red as the fury I released. I invested in a friend's art gallery, moved by Mr. Clarkson's artistic transformation. One uncharacteristically sunny February afternoon in Boston, I wandered through a winding alley and stumbled upon a sign, "Beginner's Pottery Class Today." On a whim, I stepped inside the vibrant studio. Clay squished sensually between my fingers as I spun lumpy vases and bowls, remembering the feeling of molding my destiny again, too. The instructor invited me to return any time. I smiled, but knew I would likely not, having scratched that artistic itch. Still, it heartened me to realize that woman who first met Daniel was still inside me somewhere beneath the layers of hardship. The one enchanted by possibilities, seduced by the promise of passion. She could emerge again one day, older and wiser, without naiveté's rose-colored glasses dimming red flags. For now, I relished traveling unfettered, seeking communities where I might plant fresh roots. Mr. Clarkson checked in during my wanderings. He sounded livelier, invigorated by his reclaimed autonomy too. The wounded healers finding wholeness apart, yet forever bonded by tribulations weathered side by side. "I'm so proud of you, my darling girl," his letters always closed. My journeys finally led me back to the familiar streets of home, altered now through the lens of hard-won wisdom. I settled into a new downtown condo 30 floors up with panoramic views of the city that shaped me. By day, I embraced my promotion wholeheartedly, the logistics company now flourishing under my leadership. Business travel still pulled me away, but I strategically blocked out evenings and weekends, sacred times for rekindling friendships, enjoying concerts in the park, trying that new Greek restaurant around the corner. I made time for leisure now, resisting my inclination to fill scheduling gaps by overfunctioning. Silence and solitude have a place too. My therapist, a grounded woman with kind eyes, helped me release outdated guilt and make peace with simply being. "It's not selfish to set boundaries and acknowledge your needs, Eliza," she reminded me gently in one poignant session. "Think of it as wisely managing your energy, not depriving others." Wise words. On the anniversary of my divorce, instead of drowning in Cabernet with Sarah, I booked a spa retreat weekend. My masseuse worked out knots of lingering tension. The seaweed body wrap hugged me senses. Going through the mud helped me emerge cleaner on the other side. I still met Daniel occasionally, intense legal meetings finalizing the last dregs of our split. He seemed a defeated shell of the dazzling man I once knew. We exchanged strained pleasantries about the weather, no more. Meanwhile, Mr. Clarkson proudly emailed me photos of the seaside villa he renovated in Corsica. "You must visit this summer, my dear. I insist you have your own room with a view. These old bones just ache to sit on the terrace watching that spectacular sunset with you again." I smiled wistfully at his invitation, imagining us peacefully admiring the pink and golden glow spreading across the evening skies. A future still unfolding, ready for me to shape anew. I find myself back at that little Italian cafe where my life's unexpected journey first began. The one near my office with the red awning, aromatic espresso, and decadent pastries in the front case. After years of bitter heartache and grueling legal battles, I now return older, wiser yet with a renewed spark of optimism within. I sit at the same quaint bistro table by the front window where Daniel first caught my eye years ago. So much has transpired since that fateful meeting. As I sip my cappuccino, I open the latest postcard from Mr. Clarkson, a scenic coastal shot of Corsica, where he invites me to visit this summer at his new villa. His looping script details the bright blooms in his garden, the neighbor's new litter of kittens he wants to show me. Recommendations for local vineyards we'll sample together. I smile as I visualize this next chapter waiting to unfold with this dear friend. Glancing around the cafe, I notice a handsome, well-dressed businessman waiting for his espresso order at the counter. He turns slightly and our eyes connect, setting off a hint of pleasant nerves within me. I recall our past run-ins with men like Daniel, who could seduce with charm, yet lacked substance beneath bespoke suits. But gazing into this stranger's kind eyes, I sense something different this time. A depth and authenticity that stirs my cautious heart. I decide to take a vulnerable risk. As he receives his drink order, I catch his eye again and smile warmly. An invitation. I gesture to the empty seat across from me in unspoken question. His eyes crinkle around the edges as he walks over. "Is this seat taken?" he asks in a gentle voice that soothes and sparks simultaneously. I shake my head, still smiling. "Not at all." A new story is writing itself, line by line as we speak. I sip my coffee, alive to the promise of possibilities. Right here, where it all started, my next bold chapter awaits.